The shovel hit metal with a bone-jarring clang that echoed across the empty ranch. Sarah Martinez dropped to her knees, brushing away decades of soil to reveal the bright yellow warning tape wrapped around a massive gas pipeline. Her blood ran, cold as she read the corporate logo, the same company her HOA president's husband worked for, the same pipeline that was supposed to be safely rerouted 20 years ago, the same pipeline that sat directly beneath the elementary school playground. They were breaking ground for tomorrow. Sarah's trembling finger hit record on her phone just as footsteps approached from behind. "You weren't supposed to find that," came the familiar voice of Margaret Thornfield, HOA president, her shadow falling across the exposed pipe like a death shroud. Sarah Martinez had always trusted her instincts, but as she knelt in the scorching Texas dirt at 6 a.m., sweat already beading on her forehead, she wondered if this time they'd led her astray. The property dispute with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA had consumed her life for 8 months. Ever since they'd claimed her late grandmother's 40-acre ranch somehow violated community guidelines. Guidelines that apparently included a mandatory beautification assessment of $12,000 and the seizure of a strip of land for a new elementary school playground. The morning sun cast long shadows across the disputed boundary line as Sarah positioned her phone on a makeshift tripod of stacked rocks. She'd learned to document everything after the first 3 emergency HOA meetings, where minutes conveniently omitted her objections and Margaret Thornfield's increasingly aggressive demands. The small recording device clipped to her shirt was already running, a habit born of necessity when dealing with people who rewrote history as easily as they breathed. "Day 43 of the Great Meadowbrook land grab," she muttered into the phone's camera, forcing a bitter smile. "Let's see what treasure the HOA overlords want to bury under their precious playground today." She'd chosen this spot after weeks of studying the original survey maps at the county courthouse. The HOA claimed they needed exactly this section, not the flat, easily accessible area near the road, but this specific rectangle of scrubland dotted with mesquite trees. When pressed for reasons, Margaret had waved her manicured hand dismissively, citing optimal drainage patterns and feng shui considerations for childhood development. Sarah's engineering background had immediately flagged the explanation as bureaucratic nonsense, but proving it required dirt work. The first shovel bite hit harder ground than expected. Sarah had anticipated clay and limestone, typical for this part of hill country, but the resistance felt different, metallic. After 10 minutes of careful digging, following the ridge of whatever lay beneath, her tool struck something that rang like a bell. Yellow warning tape emerged first, its bright color startling against the dark earth. Sarah's pulse quickened as she brushed away more soil, revealing block letters that made her stomach drop. Danger. High pressure. Natural. Gas pipeline. Call before you dig. Holy shit. The words escaped before she could catch them. She glanced at her phone, still recording, and decided to leave them in. This wasn't a time for professional composure. More digging revealed a pipeline at least 4 feet in diameter, running perfectly straight through what the HOA insisted was the ideal location for swing sets and monkey bars. Sarah sat back on her heels, mind racing through the implications. Natural gas pipelines required massive safety buffers, typically 200 feet or more from any structures, especially schools. Building a playground directly over one wasn't just illegal, it was potentially catastrophic. She photographed everything, capturing the pipeline from multiple angles, the warning tape, the official markings barely visible through decades of corrosion. Her phone's timestamp would prove when and where these photos were taken. Then she noticed something else that made her blood run cold. The pipeline bore the logo of Meridian Energy Corporation. Margaret Thornfield's husband, Robert, was Meridian's regional safety director. Sarah's mind flashed to the HOA's monthly newsletters, where Margaret never missed an opportunity to humble brag about Robert's important work, keeping our community safe from industrial hazards. She'd served on the Environmental Safety Committee. She'd pushed through the ordinance requiring disclosure of any hazardous materials or infrastructure within a half-mile of residential areas. Margaret Thornfield knew about this pipeline, had to know, and she was pushing to build a children's playground directly on top of it. "Okay, think," Sarah whispered, speaking more to herself than the camera. "Why would someone want to build a school over a gas pipeline? Unless—" Her voice trailed off as a more sinister possibility occurred to her. "Unless you need an excuse to move the pipeline. And what better excuse than children's safety?" Sarah had spent enough time in municipal planning meetings to understand how these things worked. If the pipeline was discovered during construction, after the HOA had already seized the land and secured federal funding for the school project, Meridian would be required to reroute it at enormous expense. Unless, of course, they had a predetermined solution ready, like buying the rest of Sarah's ranch at below-market prices to run the new pipeline route through property they'd effectively stolen. The sound of a car engine jolted her back to the moment. Through the mesquite trees, she spotted Margaret Thornfield's pristine white Escalade bumping along the dirt road that bordered the disputed property. Sarah glanced at her phone's clock, 7:23 a.m. Margaret was either an incredibly early riser, or someone had called to report suspicious activity on the construction site. Sarah quickly scooped dirt back over the exposed pipeline, leaving just enough visible to prove its location while making it look like a casual discovery rather than a deliberate excavation. She pocketed her phone, keeping the recording running, and grabbed her shovel just as Margaret's heels clicked across the hard-pan dirt. "Sarah, darling." Margaret's voice carried its usual blend of condescension and fake concern, but there was something else beneath it today. Tension, maybe even fear. "What brings you out here so early? Surely you're not still contesting the boundary survey. The legal team assured me that matter was settled." "Just getting a feel for the land before you concrete it over," Sarah replied, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Wanted to see what my grandmother loved so much about this particular spot." Margaret's eyes darted to the disturbed earth around Sarah's feet. "I hope you're not planning any more delays. The construction crew arrives at 8, and we have federal deadlines to meet. The children are counting on their new playground." "Funny thing about this spot," Sarah said, leaning on her shovel handle. "My grandmother always said it was special, said there were things buried here that people wanted to forget about." She watched Margaret's face carefully. Course, she was probably just talking about old fencing or something. A muscle twitched in Margaret's jaw. "Your grandmother was a lovely woman, but she was also in her 80s and prone to imaginative stories. I think we all remember her claims about underground rivers and buried treasure." Sarah had never heard her grandmother mention underground rivers or buried treasure, but she filed that information away. Margaret was nervous enough to be deflecting with fictional anecdotes. "You're probably right," Sarah said agreeably. "Though, I did find something interesting about 3 feet down. Probably nothing important." Margaret stepped closer, her heels sinking slightly into the loose dirt. "What kind of something?" Sarah gestured vaguely at the area where she'd covered the pipeline. Old pipe of some kind. Pretty big, too. Yellow warning tape wrapped around it, but the writing was too faded to read. Probably from back when they built the development. Water main, maybe. The color drained from Margaret's face so quickly that Sarah almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You found a pipe?" Margaret's voice had lost its artificial warmth, replaced by something that sounded suspiciously like panic. Right about here." Sarah scuffed her boot in the dirt above the pipeline. "Should I call the utility company? I mean, if you're planning to put playground equipment here, They probably need to know about any infrastructure below ground. Margaret's phone appeared in her hand, with practiced speed. No, that won't be necessary. I'm sure it's nothing significant, but we have protocols for these situations. Let me make a few calls, get the right people out here to assess the situation properly. She was already backing toward her Escalade, fingers flying over her phone's screen. Sarah caught fragments of her conversation as she moved away. Found something. Yes. She was digging. No, I don't think she knows. Need you here now. Sarah waited until Margaret's car disappeared down the dirt road before kneeling beside the pipeline again. She cleared the dirt away more carefully this time, photographing the Meridian Energy logo with her phone's macro lens. The corporate identification numbers were still partially visible despite the corrosion. More importantly, she could see manufacturing dates stamped into the metal, 1987. This pipeline was 37 years old, installed long before the HOA existed, before most of the houses in Meadowbrook Estates had been built. And according to the survey maps she'd studied, it ran directly beneath what was now the community center, the tennis courts. Sarah's hands were still shaking from the anonymous death threat when she pulled into the parking lot of Martinez Engineering, the small firm her late father had built and she'd inherited, along with his stubborn streak and talent for making enemies. The familiar sight of her nameplate on the office door usually steadied her nerves, but today it felt like a target painted on her back. The first thing she noticed was the black sedan parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun like dead eyes. The same model she'd seen following her from the ranch, maintaining just enough distance to avoid being obvious but close enough to send a message. Sarah pretended not to notice as she unlocked her office, but her pulse quickened when she spotted the second car at the far end of the parking lot. Inside her office, Sarah immediately activated the security system her paranoid ex-husband had insisted on installing during their divorce: motion sensors, audio recording, and cameras that uploaded directly to encrypted cloud storage. She thought the precautions were overkill at the time, but Tom's warnings about people who make problems disappear suddenly seemed prophetic. Her computer screen flickered to life, revealing 17 missed calls from Margaret Thornfield, 6 from unknown numbers, and 1 from a contact that made her blood freeze: Detective Ray Castellanos, Bexar County Sheriff's Department. The man who'd ruled her grandmother's death an accident despite the suspicious circumstances Sarah had raised. The voicemail from Castellanos was brief and ominous. "Ms. Martinez, I need to speak with you about some allegations you've been making regarding federal infrastructure. My office noon today. This isn't optional." Sarah deleted the message but saved a copy to her encrypted backup. Castellanos had been notably uninterested in investigating the convenient timing of her grandmother's fatal fall just 3 days after she'd threatened to expose those HOA vultures for what they really are. Now he was suddenly concerned about Sarah's activities. The connection wasn't subtle. Her phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. "Can't reach you by phone. Emergency meeting. Someone filed criminal charges against you for destruction of federal property. Warrant being processed now." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the implications hit her. They were moving fast, too fast for a simple property dispute. This kind of coordinated legal and law enforcement response suggested resources, far beyond what a suburban HOA should have access to. Unless, of course, the HOA was just a front for something much larger. She spent the next hour uploading every file she'd collected to multiple secure servers, including copies to her journalist friend Maria Santos at the San Antonio Express-News. If something happened to her, at least the evidence would survive. As she worked, Sarah noticed the black sedan had been joined by a white panel van with heavily tinted windows. Her office phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Sarah Martinez?" The voice was professionally neutral, giving nothing away. "Who's asking?" "My name is Dr. Elizabeth Chen, EPA Criminal Investigation. Division. I understand you've discovered some concerning infrastructure issues in your area. I'd like to discuss them with you. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. How do I know you're really EPA? Because I'm calling you instead of arresting you, Dr. Chen replied dryly, which is more than I can say for the people currently surrounding your building. Look out your front window. Sarah peered through the blinds. The black sedan and white van had been joined by two more vehicles, effectively boxing in her office. Men in tactical gear were positioning themselves around the building's perimeter. Who are they? Sarah asked. Private contractors working for interests that don't want EPA asking questions about 37-year-old pipelines running beneath residential developments, Dr. Chen said. I suggest you exit through your back door immediately, drive to the Riverwalk downtown, park at the Majestic Square Garage Level 3, and walk to the Iron Cactus restaurant. I'll be waiting. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, weighing her options. Trust a voice on the phone claiming to be federal law enforcement, or wait for the tactical team outside to decide her fate. Neither choice felt particularly safe. A loud bang from the front of her building made the decision for her. Sarah grabbed her backup laptop and the evidence files she'd printed, stuffed everything into her messenger bag, and headed for the back exit. The alley behind her office was empty, except for her old Ford pickup truck and a dumpster that provided convenient cover. She was 20 feet from her truck when a voice called out behind her. Sarah Martinez, you need to stop right there. Sarah turned to see Detective Castellanos stepping out from behind the dumpster, his hand resting on his weapon. His usually immaculate appearance was rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been up all night. Ray, Sarah said carefully, funny meeting you here. Cut the shit, Sarah. You've stepped in something that's way over your head. These people don't play games. What people, Ray? The HOA? Or the ones who paid you to rule my grandmother's death and accident? Castellanos flinched as if she'd slapped him. Your grandmother wasn't an accident, he said quietly, but proving. It would have gotten us both killed, just like what you're doing now is going to get you killed. Sarah felt the world shift around her as the implications of his words sank in. You knew? You knew she was murdered and you covered it up? I knew that Elena Martinez was asking too many questions about land deals and pipeline routes. And 3 days later, she was found at the bottom of her stairs with a broken neck, Castellanos said. I also knew that the same week, 2 other people who'd been asking similar questions in other counties died in equally convenient accidents. A car crash in Guadalupe County, a hunting accident in Comal County. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from both ends of the alley. Castellanos glanced around nervously, then stepped closer to Sarah. Listen to me very carefully, he said, pulling a flash drive from his pocket. This contains everything I couldn't put in the official file about your grandmother's death. Bank records showing payments to the coroner, phone records connecting the medical examiner to Meridian. Energy executives, even some audio recordings from my own investigation. Sarah took the flash drive with trembling fingers. Why are you helping me now? Because Elena was a good woman who deserved better, and because I'm tired of being part of a system that covers up murders for corporate profits, Castellanos said. Also because they just offered me $50,000 to arrest you on bogus charges and make sure you disappeared into the system long enough for this whole thing to get buried. The footsteps were getting closer from both directions. Castellanos pulled out his handcuffs but didn't move to use them. I'm going to pretend to arrest you, he said. Play along, and when we get to my car, duck down and run toward the street. I'll give you as much of a head start as I can. Ray, they'll know you helped me. Probably, but I'm 62 years old and tired of being scared of men in expensive suits. He raised his voice as figures appeared at both ends of the alley. Sarah Martinez, you're under arrest for destruction of federal property and interference with a government investigation. The handcuffs clicked around Sarah's wrists. but Castellanos had left them loose enough to slip out of if needed. As he guided her toward his unmarked police car, Sarah could see the tactical team members relaxing slightly, assuming their target was neutralized. "When I open the car door," Castellanos whispered, "run toward the street and don't look back. There's a woman from EPA waiting for you downtown, Dr. Elizabeth Chen. She's one of the good ones." Castellanos opened the rear door of his police car and pretended to help Sarah inside. Instead, she slipped the handcuffs and bolted toward the street, her messenger bag clutched against her chest. Behind her, she heard Castellanos shouting as if he were pursuing an escaped suspect, but his footsteps were deliberately heavy and slow. Sarah reached the street, just as her old pickup truck exploded. The blast knocked her to the ground, her ears ringing from the concussion. Debris rained down around her as she struggled to her feet, tasting blood and concrete dust. Through, the smoke and chaos, she could see Castellanos arguing with the tactical team, his voice carrying over the noise. "What the hell did you do that for? She was secured." "Orders changed," one of the tactical officers replied. The situation became too volatile for conventional resolution. Sarah realized with crystal clarity that she was supposed to have been in that truck when it exploded. The timing was too perfect, the tactical team's positioning too convenient. They hadn't just wanted to arrest her, they'd wanted to eliminate her entirely and make it look like an accident. A pair of strong hands grabbed her arms and hauled her to her feet. Sarah turned to see a petite Asian woman in a business suit, her expression grim but determined. "Dr. Chen?" Sarah gasped. "In the flesh, and we need to get out of here before they realize their bomb missed its target." Dr. Chen guided Sarah toward a nondescript gray sedan parked at the curb. "Can you walk?" "Yeah, I think so." Sarah looked back toward the alley where Castellanos was still arguing with the tactical team. "What about Ray?" Detective Castellanos made his choice. "Right now, my priority is keeping you alive long enough to testify." The interior of the town car was dark leather and chrome, but what caught Sarah's attention was the woman sitting in the far corner, early 60s, silver hair pulled into a severe bun, wearing a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. She radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from wielding real power, not the performative posturing Sarah had grown accustomed to from Margaret Thornfield. "Ms. Martinez," the woman said, extending a manicured hand. "Victoria Blackwood, United States Attorney for the Western District of Texas. I've been following your situation with considerable interest." Sarah shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and calculating gaze. "The U.S. Attorney? This is about more than a gas pipeline, isn't it?" "Much more." Victoria gestured for Sarah and Dr. Chen to settle into the seats facing her as the car pulled out of the parking garage. "What you've uncovered is the tip of an iceberg that goes back 25 years and involves billions of dollars in environmental crimes, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder." Dr. Chen pulled out a tablet and handed it to Sarah. The screen displayed a map of South Texas dotted with red markers, each labeled with dates and brief descriptions. Sarah's blood chilled as she read, "Elena Martinez, fall broken neck, Sept 15, 2024. James Morrison, car accident, Aug 3, 2023. Dr. Patricia Liu, hunting accident, Nov 12, 2022. 17 deaths over 20 years, Victoria said quietly. All people who discovered unauthorized development over critical energy infrastructure. All ruled accidents or natural causes by coroners who received substantial payments from shell companies controlled by Meridian Energy Corporation. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the list. Each entry represented someone's grandmother, father, sister. People who had died simply for asking the right questions. "How long have you known about this?" 3 years, Victoria replied. "But until now, we've never had a living witness who could connect all the pieces. Every time we got close to building a case, key evidence would disappear or witnesses would suffer convenient accidents." The car turned onto Interstate 35, heading north toward Austin. Sarah watched the familiar landmarks of San Antonio disappear in the rear window, wondering if she'd ever see her hometown again. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe, while we discuss how you're going to help us bring down one of the largest criminal conspiracies in Texas history," Victoria said. She pressed a button on the car's console, and a partition rose between them and the driver. "But first, you need to understand exactly what you're up against." Dr. Chen took back her tablet and pulled up a new screen showing corporate organizational charts. Meridian Energy Corporation is owned by Blackstone Capital Holdings, which is controlled by the Sinclair Family Trust, the same family that owns half the commercial real estate in South Texas and has political connections reaching into the governor's mansion. James Sinclair sits on the boards of 3 major energy companies and 2 environmental consulting firms, Victoria continued. His son Michael is a state senator, and his daughter runs the largest environmental law firm between Houston and El Paso. When they want something buried, it stays buried. Sarah studied the web of connections displayed on the tablet. "But why build over the pipelines? Why not just reroute them legally?" "Because rerouting costs hundreds of millions of dollars and years of environmental impact studies," Dr. Chen explained. "Much cheaper to buy off local officials, build the developments anyway, and eliminate anyone who asks inconvenient questions until something goes wrong." Victoria leaned forward, her expression grim. 2 months ago, we detected unusual pressure fluctuations in 3 different pipeline segments that run beneath residential areas. Our engineers estimate we're looking at potential ruptures within the next 18 months. When those pipelines blow, they'll take out entire neighborhoods. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "How many people?" "Conservative estimate, 2,000 dead, 5,000 injured, entire communities destroyed." Victoria's voice was clinical, but Sarah could see the anger burning in her eyes. "And the Sinclair family would rather let that happen than admit they've been systematically violating federal safety regulations for decades." The car exited the interstate and turned onto a rural road lined with oak trees. Sarah noticed they were being followed by 2 black SUVs, maintaining a discreet distance but clearly providing security. "So, what do you need from me?" Sarah asked. "Everything you've documented plus your testimony," Victoria replied. "But more importantly, we need you to go back." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Go back where?" "To Meadowbrook Estates, to your grandmother's ranch. We need you to continue the investigation your grandmother started, but this time with federal backing and protection." Dr. Chen pulled up another screen showing surveillance photos of the ranch. "We've been monitoring the site since your escape this morning. Meridian has brought in a full remediation crew, supposedly to safely assess the pipeline situation. What they're really doing is destroying evidence and preparing to relocate the pipeline before anyone can document the safety violations. They're moving fast because they know we're onto them," Victoria added. "If we can't prove the original pipeline configuration within the next 72 hours, they'll have it rerouted and any evidence of criminal wrongdoing will disappear forever." Sarah shook her head. "I can't go back there. They tried to kill me this morning." "Which is why you'll have protection," Victoria said. She pressed another button, and the car phone activated. "Agent Morrison, report." A crisp voice responded, through the speakers. "Perimeter secure, ma'am. Meridian's contractor crews are maintaining a 50-meter safety zone around the pipeline site, but they're not armed. The real security is hanging back at the development entrance." "How many?" Victoria asked. 8 visible, probably twice that many in reserve. Professional operators, not local muscle." Victoria turned back to Sarah. "We have a federal task force in position around the ranch. FBI, EPA criminal investigators, and a few specialists from other agencies. You won't be going in alone. And if something goes wrong, then we extract you and prosecute this case based on the evidence we already have," Victoria said. But without the original pipeline documentation and soil samples proving how long it's been buried under residential property, our case is circumstantial. James Sinclair has the best lawyers money can buy. We need ironclad proof. The car pulled into a rest area overlooking Lake Travis. Victoria gestured toward a small group of RVs parked near the water, the kind of mobile command center Sarah had seen on crime shows, bristling with antennas and satellite dishes. "This is where we'll coordinate the operation," Victoria said, as they climbed out of the car. "Dr. Chen will brief you on exactly what evidence we need, and Agent Morrison will explain the security protocols. But first, I want you to see something." She led Sarah to the largest RV, where a bank of monitors displayed live feeds from cameras positioned around Meadowbrook Estates. Sarah could see her grandmother's house, the disputed land where she'd discovered the pipeline, and the HOA community center where Margaret Thornfield presumably held court. "Watch this," Victoria said, pointing to a monitor showing the pipeline site. Even from the aerial view, Sarah could see dozens of workers in hazmat suits carefully excavating around the exposed pipe. Heavy machinery waited nearby, ready to begin serious construction work. "They're not just documenting the pipeline," Dr. Chen explained. "They're preparing to move it. Our geologists estimate they'll need about 48 hours to fully expose the section that runs under the residential area, then another 24 hours to begin the actual relocation. After that, it's just their word against ours about where the original pipeline was located," Victoria added. "And James Sinclair's word carries a lot of weight in Texas courts." Sarah watched the activity on the monitors, thinking about her grandmother's determination to protect the land that had been in their family for 3 generations. Elena Martinez had died trying to stop this conspiracy. The least Sarah could do was finish what she'd started. "What exactly do you need me to do?" she asked. Victoria smiled for the first time since they'd met. "Something your grandmother never had the chance to do. We need you to get close enough to that pipeline to plant federal monitoring equipment that will record every structural detail before they move it. Equipment that will prove definitively how long it's been buried and what safety violations have been occurring." "And how am I supposed to get close enough to do that when they have armed security and a 50-meter perimeter?" Dr. Chen grinned. "Because you still own that land, and you have every legal right to be there, especially when you're accompanied by federal environmental inspectors conducting an emergency safety assessment." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Sarah would return to the ranch as herself, accompanied by Dr. Chen and 2 EPA technicians, claiming to conduct an independent safety evaluation of the pipeline before consenting to any HOA development plans. Their legal right to access the property was unquestionable, and Meridian couldn't refuse without revealing they had something to hide. "Of course, they'll try to stop you," Victoria warned. "Probably through legal intimidation, possibly through more direct means." The convoy of federal vehicles rolled through the gates of Meadowbrook Estates like an invading army, but Sarah felt more like she was returning to a graveyard. Every street corner held memories of her grandmother's stories about the land before the development, when it was all open ranch and the only sounds were wind through mesquite trees and the distant hum of machinery that nobody was supposed to acknowledge. Dr. Chen sat beside her in the lead vehicle, checking the monitoring equipment. "One final time. Remember, we need soil samples from at least 6 different points along the pipeline route, plus photographic documentation of the original installation markings. If they've been falsifying safety reports for 20 years, the evidence will be in the substrate layers." Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on the brass key in her pocket and the cryptic message Victoria had shared. Elena Martinez's final communication to federal authorities had been brief. "The truth is buried where the wild roses bloom. Only mi nieta will know the song. My granddaughter will know the song." Sarah's throat tightened as she remembered her grandmother singing in the garden behind the old ranch house, her voice carrying across the fields as she tended the climbing roses she'd planted along the fence line. Elena had always said those roses were special, brought from Mexico by Sarah's great-great-grandmother and carefully preserved through decades of drought and development pressure. "Contact in 30 seconds, Agent Morrison's voice crackled through their radio. "Meridian Security is maintaining position, but they're watching. Remember, you have every legal right to be on this property. Don't let them intimidate you into leaving before we get what we need." The vehicles pulled up to the disputed boundary line where Sarah had made her discovery that morning. The scene looked like a hazmat cleanup operation. Dozens of workers in white suits, heavy machinery positioned for major excavation, and enough warning signs to mark a nuclear accident site. But what caught Sarah's attention was the figure standing. Apart from the workers watching their arrival with undisguised hostility, James Sinclair was exactly what Sarah had expected from Victoria's description. Mid-60s, silver-haired, wearing a $1,000 suit that somehow looked perfectly at home on a construction site. He radiated the kind of casual arrogance that came from decades of buying whatever he wanted, including judges, senators, and silence. "Ms. Martinez," Sinclair called out as Sarah climbed from the federal vehicle. "I understand you've been causing quite a disturbance over a simple property matter. Perhaps we can resolve this like civilized people?" Dr. Chen stepped up beside Sarah, her EPA credentials clearly visible. "Mr. Sinclair, we're here to conduct a federal environmental assessment. I trust your people will provide full cooperation with our investigation." Sinclair's smile never wavered, but something cold and dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Of course. Though I should mention that our preliminary safety evaluation has revealed some concerning structural instabilities in this area. For your protection, I'd recommend limiting your investigation to visual inspection only." "Structural instabilities?" Sarah asked. "You mean like a high-pressure gas pipeline that's been buried under residential property for 37 years? The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sinclair's mask of civility slipped just enough to reveal the predator beneath. "I'm not sure where you got that information, Ms. Martinez, but I assure you our environmental compliance is beyond reproach. Perhaps someone has been filling your head with conspiracy theories." Dr. Chen was already directing her technicians toward the pipeline site. But Sarah noticed that Meridian security personnel were subtly repositioning themselves to block access to key areas. This was going to be a chess match played with federal regulations and legal technicalities, at least until someone decided to escalate to more direct methods. "Sarah." The voice came from behind her, soft and familiar. Sarah turned to see Margaret Thornfield approaching, but the composed HOA president was gone. This woman looked haunted, her usually perfect appearance disheveled and her hands shaking. "Margaret, I got your message." "Did you?" Margaret glanced nervously at the federal agents surrounding them. "Because if you did, you'd know that talking here, now, with all these people watching, is going to get us both killed." James Sinclair stepped closer, his presence radiating menace. "Margaret, I think you should return to the community center. This is a technical matter that doesn't require HOA involvement." "No," Margaret said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm tired of letting you handle things. Look what your handling has led to. Federal investigations, dead witnesses, and enough evidence to put us all in prison for the rest of our lives." Sarah could feel the tension escalating, but she was more focused on the brass key in her pocket and her grandmother's message about wild roses. If Elena had hidden evidence somewhere on the property, Sarah needed to find it before this confrontation spiraled into violence. "Margaret," Sarah said carefully, "why don't you show me around? The community center? I'd love to see how the HOA has developed the area since my grandmother's time." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. She understood the suggestion. "Of course. James, I'm sure you can handle the technical discussions with the EPA. Sarah and we'll just catch up on neighborhood matters." Sinclair looked like he wanted to object, but Dr. Chen chose that moment to announce loudly that her team was ready to begin soil extraction, drawing his attention back to the immediate threat of federal evidence gathering. Margaret led Sarah away from the main group toward the path that wound behind the community center to the older part of the property. As soon as they were out of earshot, Margaret grabbed Sarah's arm. "Listen to me very carefully," she whispered, urgently. "James Sinclair didn't just have your grandmother killed. He's planning to eliminate everyone who knows about the pipeline network, including me, including you, including half the people in this development who've started asking questions." "Why are you telling me this? This morning you were trying to steal my land." "Because this morning I thought we were just talking about money and property values," Margaret replied. "I didn't know about the murders. I didn't know about the other developments, the pattern of deaths, the systematic cover-up. When I found out—" She shuddered. Robert's been living with nightmares for 20 years, knowing that every safety report he falsified could lead to thousands of deaths. He finally told me everything last night. They had reached the back of the community center, where a landscaped garden area bordered the old ranch property. Sarah could see the fence line where her grandmother's rose bushes had once grown, though they'd been cleared away when the development was built. "Margaret, where are my grandmother's roses?" "What?" Margaret looked confused by the sudden change of subject. "The climbing roses along the back fence. My grandmother planted them decades ago. Where did the landscapers put them when they cleared the area?" They didn't move them. Robert had them destroyed during construction. Said they were overgrown and presented a maintenance issue." Margaret paused, studying Sarah's expression. "Why?" Sarah's heart sank. If the roses were gone, how was she supposed to find whatever her grandmother had hidden? Elena's message said, "Where the wild roses bloom." But if they'd been destroyed, wait, wild roses. Not the climbing roses everyone could see, but the wild variety that grew in hidden places, spreading underground through root systems that could survive almost anything. "Margaret, when they cleared the roses, did they remove the root systems?" "I don't think so. Robert just had the visible growth cut down and the area covered with new landscaping. He said it was cheaper than full excavation." Margaret's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Sarah, what are you looking for?" Sarah was already moving toward the fence line, studying the landscaped area for any signs of rose growth trying to push through the newer plantings. There, a patch of ground near the corner post where the new grass looked slightly different, and small thorny shoots were beginning to emerge from the soil. She knelt and began pulling away the decorative mulch, her fingers working through the earth until she felt the familiar texture of old root systems. The wild roses had indeed survived, sending up new growth despite years of suppression. "What is this about?" Margaret demanded, but Sarah barely heard her. She was thinking about her grandmother's songs, the Mexican lullabies Elena had sung while working in her garden. One in particular came back to her, a song about hidden treasures that could only be found by counting the right number of steps in the right direction. 10 pasos hacia el sol naciente, 5 hacia la estrella del norte, Sarah whispered, remembering the lyrics. 10 steps toward the rising sun, 5 toward the North Star. She stood and paced off the distance, counting carefully. 10 steps east, from the largest rose root cluster, then 5 steps north. The location brought her to an unremarkable patch of ground beneath an ornamental juniper tree. Sarah knelt again and began digging with her hands, pushing aside the landscaping fabric and searching through the soil beneath. Her fingers hit something hard and metallic, a small waterproof container exactly the right size for the brass, key in her pocket. "Sarah, what have you found?" Margaret's voice was tight with anxiety. "My grandmother's insurance policy," Sarah replied, lifting the coat. 6 hours after James Sinclair's arrest, Sarah sat in the FBI's mobile command center watching news helicopters circle overhead like mechanical vultures. The story was already breaking on local television. Federal environmental investigation leads to arrests in Meadowbrook Estates. But the sanitized reports bore no resemblance to the conspiracy of murder and environmental terrorism she'd uncovered. The media blackout won't hold much longer, Victoria warned, reviewing the evidence Sarah had discovered in her grandmother's cache. Sinclair's legal team is already claiming prosecutorial overreach and demanding his immediate release. Without the trophy room evidence Elena mentioned, we have circumstantial proof of conspiracy, but nothing that directly links him to the murders. Agent Morrison looked up from his laptop, where he'd been coordinating with teams across Texas. We've got bigger problems. 3 more sites on Elena's map showed unusual activity in the last 2 hours. Someone's activating a cleanup protocol, destroying evidence at locations we haven't even investigated yet. Sarah studied the map her grandmother had hidden, noting the red X marks scattered across South Texas. 17 sites where pipelines ran beneath schools, hospitals, shopping centers, a network of potential disasters that could kill thousands if the aging infrastructure failed. And somewhere in the vast Sinclair family compound north of Austin, James Sinclair had kept souvenirs from everyone who'd died trying to expose his crimes. "How do we get into the ranch?" Sarah asked. Victoria and Morrison exchanged glances. "We don't," Victoria said firmly. "The Sinclair family compound is on private property with security that rivals most military installations. We'd need federal warrants, which require probable cause we don't currently have. And even then—" "I have probable cause," Sarah interrupted, pulling out her grandmother's letter. "Elena specifically states that evidence of the murders is hidden in Sinclair's private study. That's enough for a search warrant. It's the uncorroborated testimony of a deceased witness about alleged evidence that may or may not exist," Victoria replied. "Any judge Sinclair hasn't bought will throw it out, and any judge he has bought will make sure we never get close to that compound." Agent Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Command, this is Surveillance Team Alpha. We have multiple vehicles leaving the Sinclair compound, heading southeast toward the Houston pipeline corridor. Heavy trucks. Looks like document destruction equipment." Sarah felt the urgency building like pressure in her chest. "They're destroying everything right now, while we're sitting here debating legal technicalities. By tomorrow morning, there won't be any evidence left to find." "Sarah," Victoria said gently, "I understand your frustration, but we have to follow proper procedures. The case we've already built will put Sinclair away for conspiracy charges, even if we can't prove the murders directly." "Conspiracy charges? That his lawyers will plea bargain down to environmental violations," Sarah replied. "He'll serve 2 years in a minimum security facility and go right back to killing people who ask inconvenient questions." Dr. Chen, who had been quietly reviewing the technical data from the pipeline site, suddenly looked up. "There might be another way," she said. "The environmental crimes we can prove are enough to trigger emergency federal oversight of all Sinclair-controlled properties. If we can demonstrate imminent threat to public safety." "How imminent?" Morrison asked. "According to our pressure analysis, 3 of the pipeline segments are showing critical stress fractures. Normal safety protocols would require immediate evacuation of all structures within a quarter-mile radius." Dr. Chen's expression was grim. "If those pipelines rupture simultaneously, we're looking at an environmental disaster that would make the Texas City refinery explosion look like a backyard barbecue." Victoria was already reaching for her phone. "How long do we have?" "Based on current degradation rates, maybe 18 hours before catastrophic failure becomes inevitable." Sarah stood up, decision crystallizing in her mind. "Then we don't wait for warrants or legal procedures. We go in tonight, get the evidence, and worry about constitutional niceties after we've prevented a few thousand deaths." "Absolutely not," Victoria said. "I'm not authorizing a black bag operation against one of the most powerful families in Texas based on speculation about hidden evidence." "Then don't authorize it," Sarah replied. "I'm not a federal agent. I'm a private citizen whose grandmother was murdered by James Sinclair, and I have every right to investigate her death using any legal means necessary." Morrison looked intrigued despite himself. "What are you proposing?" "I go in alone." "No. Federal involvement. No official sanction. If I find the evidence Elena described, I turn it over to proper authorities. If I don't, then we proceed with the case we have." Sarah met Victoria's eyes. "But if those pipelines rupture while we're following proper procedures, the blood of thousands of innocent people will be on our hands." "It's suicide," Victoria said flatly. "The Sinclair compound has armed security, surveillance systems, and response times that would make the Secret Service jealous. You'd never get within half a mile of the main house." Dr. Chen was studying something on her tablet. "Actually, there might be a way," she said slowly. "The compound is built over the same geological formation as the pipeline network. If our soil analysis is correct, there are natural limestone caves running beneath the entire property." She turned her tablet to show a geological survey map overlaid with the Sinclair property boundaries. "These cave systems were used by smugglers during Prohibition, and according to historical records, some of them connect to the original Martinez Ranch property." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "My grandmother used to tell stories about caves on the ranch. Said her grandfather used them to hide cattle during the Depression and later to help people cross the border during World War II. Cave entrances are notoriously difficult to secure," Morrison admitted. "Motion sensors don't work well in confined spaces, and the limestone interferes with most electronic surveillance equipment." Victoria was shaking her head. "Even if you could get into the compound undetected, you'd still have to locate Sinclair's study, find the hidden evidence, and get out without triggering their security. The odds are astronomical." "The odds of preventing a mass casualty event are better if I try than if I don't," Sarah replied. "And there's something else. My grandmother's letter mentioned that you knew her before this investigation started. What aren't you telling me?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her professional composure slipping. "Elena Martinez was my informant," she said finally. "She came to me 3 years ago with initial evidence about the pipeline conspiracy. I was supposed to protect her." The admission hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah could see the guilt in Victoria's eyes, the weight of responsibility for her grandmother's death. "You used her as bait," Sarah said. "I gave her a way to get justice for the people who died. She knew the risks." "Did she know you'd abandon her when things got dangerous?" Victoria flinched as if Sarah had struck her. "We didn't abandon her. We had a protection plan, safe houses, extraction protocols. Elena chose to stay and gather more evidence instead of accepting federal protection. Because she knew that without ironclad proof, Sinclair would escape justice," Sarah said. "Just like he's going to escape justice now unless someone finishes what she started." Dr. Chen was still studying the geological maps. "If you're serious about this, the cave entrance on the old Martinez property is about 2 miles from the main Sinclair house. The tunnels run roughly northwest, following the underground river system. With proper equipment and a little luck, you could reach the compound in about 4 hours." Morrison pulled up satellite images of the Sinclair property on his laptop. "The main house has 3 levels, including a basement level that's not shown on public architectural plans. If Sinclair has a private study where he keeps trophies, it would probably be there." "This is insane," Victoria said. "I can't be party to an unauthorized infiltration of private property." "Then don't be," Sarah replied. "Give me Dr. Chen's geological survey and Morrison's satellite images, then forget we ever had this conversation. When I find the evidence, I'll call you with the location. What you do with that information is your decision." Victoria stared at her for a long moment, clearly wrestling with conflicting responsibilities. Finally, she nodded. If, and I emphasize if, you were to undertake such an operation, you'd need communication equipment, basic security gear, and emergency extraction protocols. Hypothetically, Morrison added, such an operation would require precise timing. The compound's security shifts change at 2 a.m., providing a 30-minute window of reduced coverage. Dr. Chen was already printing maps and geological surveys. Hypothetically, these cave systems are known to flood during heavy rain. The Weather Service is predicting thunderstorms tonight, which could provide natural cover, but also significant danger. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with committing to a dangerous course of action. How long do I have to prepare? 6 hours until optimal conditions, Morrison replied. That gives us time to review the compound layout, identify potential security weaknesses, and, he paused, and pray that your grandmother's information is accurate. As the team began planning what they